Did you know that Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent did not just bring the Ottoman Empire to its territorial peak, but was also a legal reformer and a patron of the arts, culminating in an Ottoman golden age? Before we get into the video, I just want to take a moment to shout out my Patreon. If you enjoy my content and want to help me keep producing high quality videos consistently, consider supporting me there. Your support allows me to put more time, effort and research into making these videos the best they can be. Plus, you'll get exclusive perks as a thank you. The link is in the description below. Suleiman was born in the city of Trabzon to Shehzadeh Selim, who later became known as Sultan Selim I, and Hafsa Sultan, who was a concubine of unknown origins. Some say she may have been a Crimean Tatar princess or a Christian of slave origin. As with all Ottoman princes, Suleiman had to spend a bit of time as a provincial governor. Thus, when he was 15, he was deemed ready and given the post in Bolu. Following this, he was then given the same position in Kaffa, then at Manisa, and then finally a post at Edirne. In 1520, after ruling the Ottoman Empire for just 8 years, Selim I sadly passed away. And upon hearing this news, Suleiman made his way to Istanbul. Thus, on the 30th of September 1520, Suleiman was crowned the 10th Sultan of the Ottoman dynasty. He also followed the tradition of granting gifts to the Janissaries as well as handing pay rises. Immediately upon assuming the throne, Sultan Suleiman set his sights on Hungary. You see, during the reign of Mehmed II in the 15th century, there were attempts to seize Hungary. However, they were repelled under the leadership of the regent Hunyadi. Yet, when Suleiman had risen to power, Hungary was weak, as Hunyadi's son Matthias had died without an heir, which saw the rise of noble families trying to assert power by arranging the succession of the king which they could control. As a result, sensing this opportunity, he waited for the perfect moment, and that came when an Ottoman envoy to Buda was assassinated. This led to the mobilization of a large army that made its way to the elusive city. However, before reaching Buda, the Ottoman forces laid siege to Belgrade in 1521, and it fell within just 2 months. Despite this victory, Suleiman didn't immediately press on further into Central Europe, but rather he focused on an island near the coast of Anatolia, known as Rhodes. The reason for this is because it was right next to the heartland of the Ottoman Empire, and it was under the Knights Hospitaller. They often caused a lot of grief, as Muslim pilgrims to Mecca were often caught and enslaved by the Knights Hospitaller. Furthermore, the pirates on the island would always attack Ottoman ships. Thus, in 1522, Suleiman sent an army of 100,000 men, to which the Knights Hospitaller only had around 7,000 forces to defend their land. Despite being severely outnumbered, the Knights Hospitaller held out for 6 months, and as a result, both the Christians and Muslims respected the determination of Philip Villa Dila Adam. The Ottoman Empire then resumed its efforts on mainland Europe, in which the army headed towards Buda in 1526. They met the Hungarian forces at Mohacs, where the Turks emerged victorious and ultimately led to the partition of Hungary. Furthermore, this left the door wide open for Buda, but yet again, Suleiman didn't press on his advantage, as he simply looted the city and then returned back to their capital, Istanbul. This was a grave mistake, as Charles V and his brother Ferdinand reoccupied Buda and took possession of Hungary. Reacting to this, Suleiman marched through the Danube and regained control of Buda in 1529. This then prompted Suleiman to press on towards Vienna. However, the Austrians inflicted the first defeat on Suleiman, though this did not stop a second attempt, as in 1532 the Ottomans yet again tried to take Vienna. However, again they failed, as Ottoman forces were delayed by the siege of Guns. Meanwhile, in Persia, the threat of the Safavid Empire was growing in the 1520s. This is due to the fact that governors on both sides had been defecting. Firstly, in Baghdad, the governor offered submission to Suleiman, and the same thing happened with the Safavid governor of Azerbaijan. However, this wasn't one way, as the governor of Bitlis defected to Persia. As a result, by 1533, the Sultan decided it was time to act. He instructed Peragli Ibrahim Pasha, the Grand Vizier at the time, to recover Bitlis and then invade Persia. The Ottomans were off to a flying start, as the governor of Azerbaijan retook Bitlis and then sent the governor's head to Ibrahim. Afterwards, the Grand Vizier successfully captured the Safavid capital, Tabriz, in 1534. This was then followed by the capture of Baghdad in 1534, which was of immense strategic importance as it provided access to the Arabian Gulf and its shipping lanes. Furthermore, when the Ottomans had arrived to Baghdad, they found the tomb of Abu Hanifa desecrated, who was of grand importance to the Ottomans as he is the founder of the Hanafi madhab, which the Ottomans followed. By the late 1530s, Suleiman switched his focus back to Europe, as in 1538 he invaded Moldavia. This resulted in a resounding success as the Prince of Moldavia, Peter IV Raresh, fled into exile in Transylvania, and Suleiman occupied major cities of Moldova, including the capital of Jassy. This focus in Eastern Europe continued into the 1540s as he annexed much of the northwestern coast of the Black Sea, which rendered the Ottoman Empire and the Crimean Khanate, an Ottoman vassal state, neighbours. In the same year, in 1541, the Habsburgs under Ferdinand I tried to lay siege to Buda but were repulsed, in which Habsburg fortresses were captured by the Ottomans. Again in the following year, Ferdinand tried to capture Buda but failed yet again. As a result, Suleiman then captured Siklos and Szeged in 1543, which granted further protection for Buda in an event of an enemy attack. In the same year, the Sultan also laid siege to Székely Fehérvár, which was motivated by the fact that it was the original capital of Hungary, where the kings would be crowned. A second campaign against the Persians occurred between 1548 to 1549. In the early 1550s, the Shah of Iran, Tahmasp I, went on the offensive, as previously he would often retreat using scorched earth policies when the Ottomans were advancing. As a result, he conquered a large portion of the Ottoman territory that had been gained in the previous decades. This prompted the Ottoman Sultan to act, despite the fact that the Janissary cause believed he was too old. He set out on the Eastern Front with his two sons, Bayezid and Selim, in 1553. The Ottomans ravaged Yerevan and wrested much of the Western Caucasus out of Tahmasp's hand. After 20 years of war, a treaty was finally established known as the Peace of Amseya, which concluded the Safavid-Ottoman War. It gave the Ottomans Western Armenia, Western Kurdistan, and Western Georgia. They also obtained much of Iraq, including Baghdad, Mosul, and Basra. Meanwhile, the Persians kept their former capital, Tabriz, and former territories such as Dagestan and Azerbaijan. And for the next 10 years or so, Suleiman never set foot on a campaign until 1566, which would ultimately be his last. It was reported that he was suffering from gout. As a result, he was carried on a litter. His original target was Eger and then Vienna. However, after learning that Count Nicola Zrinski had attacked the Ottomans at Siklos, he then changed his target towards the Croatian general. This then led to the Battle of Sizgetvar in August of 1566. The forces of Zrinski fought gallantly, though they were eventually defeated as the Ottomans outnumbered them, leading to the Turkish victory. However, despite this success, the advancement towards Vienna never happened. This is due to the fact that Suleiman died on the 7th of September, a day before the Ottoman victory. Suleiman the Magnificent was not solely a conqueror, but also a legal reformer, as he is often called Kanuni in the Turkish language. Since the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the state had been ruled by the Sharia, also known as Islamic law. However, some aspects of life, such as administration and land tenure, were left vague and thus up to interpretation. In some cases, earlier sultans would pass firmans, also known as royal decrees, on aspects of law that wasn't covered by the Sharia. Thus, he collected all firmans and judgments made by the previous 9 sultans and then codified the law. Sultan Mehmed II and Bayezid II had created law codes. Suleiman brought these up to date and then incorporated them into his own Qanun. He then eliminated duplications and contradictions. Furthermore, as the Sultan was motivated by justice, he decided that his subjects need to be familiar with the rights granted to them by the Qanun. Thus, he had governors and judges to read out in public the laws. One aspect was commercial law. The level detailed by Suleiman was extraordinary, as there were rules specified on the amount of sugar and butter that could be used in desserts, or the way Turkish baths should be operated. Concession to foreign merchants, the investiture of titles to the endowment of charitable institutions such as schools, hospitals and soup kitchens were all part of the law. Another aspect of Suleiman's legal reforms was that he elevated the Grand Mufti to the position of Sheikh al-Islam. This was the highest religious authority in the empire and was responsible for interpreting Sharia law. Furthermore, he protected minorities within his empire. One such example was a law in 1534 when the Sultan issued a firman formally denouncing blood libels against the Jews. The cultural development that occurred during Sultan Suleiman's reign within the Ottoman Empire was also significant, as he patroned architecture and the arts. Firstly, he sought to turn Istanbul into a center of Islamic civilization through a series of projects including bridges, mosques, palaces, and various charitable and social establishments. As a result, he patronized the legendary architect Mimar Sinan to build a mosque in memory of his late son Shehzadeh Mehmed. According to tradition, he was so impressed that he commissioned his own mosque, the Suleymaniye Mosque, high above the Golden Horn. It is believed that over 300 monuments were designed by Mimar Sinan, who became legendary for his works. Suleiman also restored the Dome of the Rock and the walls of Jerusalem. He also renovated the Kaaba in Mecca and constructed a complex in Damascus. The development of arts was also significant during Suleiman's reign, as within his realm, hundreds of imperial artistic societies called Elihi Harifs, also known as communities of craftsmen, were administered at the imperial seat, the Topkapi Palace. Each guild had a pay structure that depended on seniority and the quality of work. There were calligraphers, bookbinders, painters, goldsmiths, jewelers, weavers, bootmakers, carpenters, and leather workers. According to documents dating from 1526, there were 40 societies with 600 members, which testifies to the breadth of Suleiman's patronage of the arts. When talking about Suleiman the Magnificent, his relationship with Hurrem Sultan, also known as Roxolana, cannot be left out. According to tradition, she was a slave girl of Ruthian origin that had been captured during a Crimean Tatar slave raid in Eastern Europe. She rose through the ranks of the Ottoman Harem and became Suleiman's favourite, and in 1534 he married her, which was unprecedented at the time. He also allowed Hurrem Sultan to remain with him at court for the rest of her life, breaking another tradition. It is believed that Hurrem's influence contributed to Suleiman's decision to execute his Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha. Furthermore, the assassination of Shehzadeh Mustafa in 1553 is attributed to Roxolana's influence, as Roxolana wanted to secure her son's position as the successor to Suleiman, as Shehzadeh Mustafa was the son of Mahidevran Hatun. However, Hurrem also engaged in numerous public works that benefited the people from Istanbul to Mecca to Jerusalem. She commissioned the Haski Sultan complex in Istanbul, which included a mosque, hospital, school, and soup kitchen that served the poor daily. In Jerusalem, she established the Hasaki Sultan Emirate in 1552, a soup kitchen to feed the poor, in which at least 500 people were fed twice a day. She also built a public soup kitchen in Mecca and mosques in Edirne and Ankara. Suleiman's relationship with his friend Ibrahim Pasha was also notable. Ibrahim, originally a Greek Christian slave through the Devshirme system, was raised in the palace and became Suleiman's closest companion long before he became the Sultan. Their bond was so strong that when Suleiman ascended to the throne in 1520, he granted Ibrahim key positions of power, eventually making him the Grand Vizier. But as Ibrahim's power grew, so did his confidence and ultimately his arrogance. He began referring to himself as the Sultan's brother and took on titles often reserved for royalty, which alarmed both the court and Hurrem Sultan. Ibrahim also clashed with various factions within the imperial palace, and his increasing independence raised suspicions in Suleiman's mind. In 1536, during a stay at the Topkapi Palace, Suleiman invited Ibrahim for dinner. However, later that night, he ordered the execution of Ibrahim. You see, Suleiman's legacy stands as one of the most remarkable in Islamic and Ottoman history. A ruler who balanced the sword with the pen and justice with ambition. As a conqueror, he expanded the Ottoman Empire to its territorial peak, dominating Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. As a lawgiver, he reformed the empire's legal code, earning him the title Kanuni, the lawgiver, for bringing structure and fairness to a vast, diverse population. Under his reign, the arts flourished, with Istanbul emerging as a hub of scholarship, poetry, calligraphy, and architecture. But beyond the battlefield and bureaucracy, Suleiman's story is also shaped by deep personal relationships, particularly with Ibrahim Pasha and Hurrem Sultan. Together, these threads form a legacy of power, culture, and complexity. As a result, a golden age was formed under Suleiman, who not only ruled with might, but also intellect and emotion. And just on a side note, for me personally, Suleiman the Magnificent was my favourite Ottoman Sultan, because he was not just a conqueror, but he also, reformed the legal proceedings within his realm, as well as the fact he patronized a lot of mosques and poetry and, the arts basically. So he's a very complex figure who, encompassed a lot of different things. Other sultans, they were good for reforms. Other sultans were good for conquering, but he was all encompassing. He, done a lot of good in different areas.